So let's now continue building our animated button. So this is the final page and the final button. And what we're missing here is this white part that looks like it zooms out to infinity when we hover, and it comes back when we hover out. You see? So this nice effect. It's not really necessary, of course, to add this, but it was a great opportunity to show you the power of CSS and of pseudo elements. So let me show you how we do it. So as I said, we're going to use pseudo elements. And pseudo elements allow us to style certain parts of elements. And for example, the after pseudo element that we're going to use adds like a virtual element right after the element that we're selecting. And we can then style that element. And so using this after pseudo element can be really powerful to do some cool effects. And once you master it, you're going to want to use it all the time. So let me just add the after pseudo element. So the trick here is to add an element that looks exactly like the button that we already have, but we put it behind the button. And when we hover out of the button, then this hidden pseudo element basically goes back behind the button. Okay? So let's see how we can do this. First, in order for an after pseudo element to actually appear on the page, we need to specify its content property. So that's always necessary. It doesn't matter what the content is, it can even be empty like we're going to do here, but we have to specify it, otherwise it's not going to appear. And the same thing with the display property. So we have to specify the display property. And in this case, we're going to say it's an inline block because the button that we have is also an inline block. And so again, we want it to be exactly the same. We want it to look the same. So we want to have a height of 100% and we want to have a width of 100% as well. And this works because the after pseudo element is basically treated like a child of the button. And so if we say that we want the height to be 100%, that's 100% of the width of the button. And so suppose that the button has 100 pixels of height and 50 pixels of width. And so this after pseudo element will have the exact same dimensions if we set it to 100%. Okay? Now the border radius should also be the same. 100 pixels, so something really big. And now we also want it to be white. But in order for it to be white, we actually should make another after pseudo element, but this time for the button right. So let's put it here. Then after. Okay. And so background color should be white. All right, now let's just see on our page if it actually shows up. So right now it still looks like it's part of our element, and so we should change that. So what we want to do, remember, is to put it behind our actual button. So how can we do that? And we use absolute positioning. So position, absolute, and then we just say it should be 0 from the top and 0 from the left. Now remember that this absolute positioning needs to have a reference. And the reference is the first element with the relative position that it can find. Now in this case it would be the header, because remember we did that before, but we don't want it to be the header. We want it to be hidden after the button. And so the reference should be the button. Therefore, what we have to do is to set the position property of the button to relative. All right. And so now it should be hidden behind the button. Now one more thing that we have to do is to set the z-index. And we will put it to -1. So remember, the z-index defines the position of the elements if they're one on top of another. And so this one has -1, and so it's definitely behind the button. Now since it's hidden, I cannot really show it to you on the page now, but we're going to see it in a little bit, all right? So when do we actually want to see it? We want to see it when we hover the button, right? So what we're going to do is to write it like this. And this may seem a bit complicated, but it's actually not. So when we hover the button, then we want some certain styles for the after pseudo element. So this looks a bit weird, but it makes totally sense. So this is an after pseudo element only when we have the button on the hover state, right? And what do we want to happen? We want it to be bigger, right? Remember? We want the element to grow and to fade out. And so what we first do is to use once again the transform property. And I told you it was really important, and so yeah, it is. This time we do a scale. So what scale does is to simply increase the element. So if we do scale 2, then it will appear double the size that it had before. So now we can actually check if it's working alright. So reload, and whoa, there it is. So this white part that you see outside here is the pseudo element that becomes visible as soon as we hover the button. Let's actually make it a different color here, like red, so just so that you can see the difference. And whoa, now it's everything red, but that's not a problem. For some reason the original button is also getting red, but we still can be sure the pseudo element is behind the button because we still can see the text, right? And so that means that the original button is still on top of the pseudo element. Okay, but let's put it back to white, where it was. And we don't want to scale it this much. So let's just say 1.5, okay? And we also want this to be animated just like before. So where do we have to put the transition property? Exactly, we do it on the initial state. In this case, the initial state is of course this after pseudo element. So we say transition, and again I'm going to use all here, and then use, like, let's say 0.4 seconds in this case. So here we had 0.2, but we want this one to take a little bit longer. Now what also happens is that the element actually fades out, right? So opacity 0. That's the trick for fading something out. It's going to opacity 0. We did that before in our other animation in the lecture before, and so here we're doing it again. So opacity 0 sets something to invisible basically. And so let's check out if it works already. Yeah, that's actually it. It's already working, right? It comes back. It goes out and it comes back. So really cool, right? Now we can make this a little bit better, because if you look closely at the top of the button, then you see that it looks really small. So the part that's fading out is like really small. Take a look. So let's do this a bit better. And actually with this I can show you that there are different scales. So scale without any x or epsilon here simply scales the entire element. But we can do scale x, and then that's how it's going to scale on the x direction, on the x axis. And here we want to do 1.4. And now scale epsilon, as you can imagine, in the other direction. So let's put 1.6 here. So there are different scales, just like there are different translates or rotates or other functions that we can put here in the transform. So let's check it out. And yeah, so now it looks a bit better. So really cool. There's just one thing left here, because take a look here what happens when we load the page. You saw this? This came up moving from the button. So first we saw these two elements coming in like we coded before, and then the button came up from the button to this position. So let's very quickly code up another animation for that, and we're going to put it here after this one. Actually, I'm going to copy it because it's pretty similar. So move in, let's say bottom now, from the bottom. This time we don't need any 80% because it's just from one point to the other. And now I'm going to leave it to you to specify this here, what we should put here, okay? So pause the video and try to figure out how this should look like, okay? So, did you figure it out? How should the button be positioned right in the beginning before the animation starts? It should be a bit lower than its current position, right? Because it's moving in from the button to its original position. And so we can do translate epsilon this time and put something like 30 pixels in here. That's because remember, for the epsilon direction, it goes like this. So from top to bottom. So if we want to move it down, it's a positive value. All right, and let's now actually use this animation. Now again, there will be multiple buttons like this, but I only want this animation to happen on this particular button. And so what I'm going to do is to create a new class on the button. So button animated, and only this button will have this class, okay? So let's put it here button animated. And then in here, I will put the animation. So animation, and I'm going to use the shorthand property that I showed you before. And now it's called move in bottom. And let's use a 0.5 second animation. And we're going to use an ease out this time. Okay. Now, plus what we're going to do is to have a delay. So we don't want to start it at the same time as the others. We want it to start slightly later. So maybe not 1 entire second, which is the animation time of the other two animations, but maybe just 75% of that. So 0.75 seconds, okay? So I told you that we could put all of these values in the same animation property. So this is the animation name, the animation duration, the animation timing function, and the animation delay. So let's take a look at what happens here. All right, so you saw that actually the button was visible before the animation happened. Let's take a look again. So it stays visible and then it starts. Now, what could we do in order to prevent this? We could simply put these initial states on the button, but that would be highly impractical, right? Wouldn't make much sense. So there is another property related to animations, and this one is called animation fill mode. So animation fill mode, and now we can set it to backwards. And what this does is that it will automatically apply the styles of the 0% before the animation starts. So again, these styles will now be applied before the animation starts, simply by using the animation fill mode and set it to backwards. So pretty amazing, right? So it's really simple solution to this problem. And so let's try it again. And yep, so here it works. All right, and that's it for this lecture and actually for this section. So we've come a long way so far and we already coded a bunch of really cool stuff, I think. We already have the header already completed. Only what's missing here is this navigation, but it's a bit too complex for now. So we're gonna leave it for another time, okay? But for now, we've come far enough with this project that it's now time to show you a little bit how CSS actually works behind the scenes. So I have a couple of really great lectures coming up, which I spent a lot of time building for you, but they will be really insightful and helpful, I hope. So review what we just did in this section maybe, or you can just move on to the next one right now. Anyway, see you next time.